Extinct is one of the heaviest words we have. When a scientist writes it down beside an animal's name, it's meant to be final, a door swinging shut for the last time. No more, gone from the world. And most of the time, that is exactly what it means. But not every time, because every so often, a creature the whole world has grieved for, mourned, catalogued, filed away under lost forever, turns up alive. In a fisherman's net off a busy port, on a bare rock spire no one had bothered to climb, on a trail camera set up in a place the experts swore held nothing but memories. My name is Wade Halloran. I've spent the better part of my life out in the field, in swamps before sunrise, on mountainsides after dark, in places where you learn to trust your eyes and then learn, just as quickly, not to. And if there's one lesson 40 years out there has drummed into me, it's this. Nature keeps her own counsel. She does not always tell us when she's gone, and she does not always tell us when she's stayed. Today I want to walk you through 15 animals that were declared extinct or given up for lost, and every one of them has a reason to make you wonder whether we spoke too soon. We'll count down to the strongest case of all at number 1, an animal officially declared extinct back in 1936, and yet in the decades since, more than 1,000 ordinary people have sworn they saw one, in the flesh, with their own eyes. And in 2023, a team of scientists sat down with the records, ran the numbers, and could not quite bring themselves to rule out that it was still with us. Stay with me to that one. I think it may be the most convincing case on this whole list. 15 animals, all of them written off, every one of them with a good reason to think that word was wrong. Let's begin. Number 15, the terror skink. We start with a lizard almost nobody has heard of, and that is precisely the point. For well over a century, the terror skink existed as exactly one thing, a single, solitary specimen in a museum drawer in Paris. One animal, collected in New Caledonia in the South Pacific somewhere around 1870, described by science in 1876, and then nothing. Not another sighting, not a track, not a scale, not a bone. For roughly 130 years, the entire known existence of this species was one preserved body under glass. And it was no ordinary lizard. It grows to about the length of your forearm, and where most skinks are gentle little insect eaters, this one carries long, curved, needle-sharp teeth, the mouth of a hunter. A skink built like a small dragon. Everyone assumed it was gone. Rats had come to those islands, and rats are death to island reptiles. Then, in December of 2003, a French researcher named Yvan Ineche was on a small islet studying sea snakes, not lizards at all, when the impossible walked right past him. A living terror skink, striding across the ground with the swagger of a predator that never got the memo about being extinct. He photographed it, and he let it go. The truth here is clean and encouraging. This wasn't a blurry photo or a hopeful guess. It was the animal itself, alive, 130 years after its one and only specimen. And they've found more since. A rediscovery this solid is the perfect place to begin. Because if a top predator can hide from science for that long, what else is out there? Number 14, Fernanda, the fantastic giant tortoise. Hold that thought, because our next one waited even longer to be found, and she has a name. On Fernanda Island in the Galápagos, a place carpeted in black lava and raked by an active volcano, there lived a species of giant tortoise known only from a single animal collected in 1906. One tortoise, gathered by an expedition, and never another. For more than 100 years, the fantastic giant tortoise was a species with a population of one, long dead, sitting in a collection in California. Scientists quietly listed it as extinct. Then, in 2019, a search team crossing that brutal lava field found her. A little old female tortoise, well past 50 years of age, small and stunted from a lifetime of scarce food, tucked into a patch of vegetation where no tortoise was supposed to be. They named her Fernanda. But finding a tortoise is one thing, proving she was the real thought-extinct species was another. The Galápagos have many kinds of tortoise, and skeptics assumed she'd simply drifted over from a neighboring island. So geneticists at Princeton and Yale did something remarkable. They pulled DNA from that lonely 1906 specimen and compared it to Fernanda. In 2022, they published the answer. She matched. She was, without doubt, a fantastic giant tortoise, the first of her kind confirmed alive in over a century. Here's what lifts this one. On later expeditions, searchers found tracks and droppings from at least 2 or 3 other tortoises out on that lava. Fernanda may not be alone, and that turns a sad story of one survivor into something with a pulse, a species that may still have a future. Number 13, the Bermuda petrel. Now let's stretch the timeline to its breaking point. The Bermuda petrel, the cahao, as the islanders call it, is a seabird with an eerie, wailing night cry. When Spanish sailors first heard thousands of them shrieking in the dark, they were convinced the island was full of devils. There were once hundreds of thousands of these birds. Then people arrived, and with them came pigs, rats, cats, and hunger. By around 1620, the cahao was gone, wiped out. For the next 3 centuries it was a footnote, an extinct bird from the early colonial days. 330 years passed, and then, in 1951, an American ornithologist and a Bermudian naturalist went looking, chasing rumors and a few fresh carcasses that had turned up. On the rocky islets at the mouth of Castle Harbor, they found them. 18 nesting pairs of a bird that had been extinct since before the Pilgrims landed. With them that day was a 15-year-old local boy named David Wingate, and the sight of those living birds set the course of his entire life. He would spend the next half-century dragging that species back from the edge. 330 years is not a close call. That is a bird surviving, unseen, through the entire history of a nation, clinging to a few bare rocks. When people tell me a species can't possibly still be out there after 50 or 60 quiet years, I think of the cahao, and 3 centuries of silence that turned out to be wrong. Number 12, the Lord Howe Island stick insect. If a bird can hide for 300 years, what about an insect the size of your hand? On Lord Howe Island, off the coast of Australia, there once lived a stick insect so large and so glossy that the locals called it the tree lobster. It was heavy, flightless, and so common that fishermen used them as bait. Then, in 1918, a supply ship ran aground on the island, and black rats poured off the wreck. Within a handful of years, the tree lobsters were gone. By 1983, science formally called the species extinct. But there was a rumor. Out in the ocean, about 13 miles from Lord Howe, stood Ball's Pyramid, a jagged volcanic spire nearly 2,000 feet tall, sheer and forbidding, the kind of place nothing large has any business surviving. Climbers had reported seeing what looked like dead stick insects on it years earlier. In 2001, 2 scientists scaled that spire at night, and there, clinging to a single scraggly shrub growing improbably out of the rock, high above the sea, they found them. The entire surviving population of the world's rarest insect, about 24 animals, living under one bush on one rock in the middle of the ocean. 24 individuals. That is how thin the thread can be. They've since been bred by the thousands in zoos, all descended from that one desperate little colony. Every last one of them is proof that extinct and hiding somewhere we never thought to look can be the very same thing. Number 11. The night parrot. Our next one is a ghost even seasoned bird watchers spent their whole careers chasing without a single sighting. Australia's night parrot is a small, plump, greenish bird that lives out in the harshest desert country, hiding by day inside dense clumps of spiky spinifex grass and moving only in the dark. It was so rarely seen that, after the last confirmed living bird in around 1912, decades rolled by with nothing. The odd dead one turned up on a fence line or a roadside, proof it hung on somewhere, but a living, breathing night parrot went completely undocumented for the better part of 100 years. Then, in 2013, a naturalist named John Young, after 15 years of searching and hundreds of thousands of miles of driving, finally called one into the light and photographed it in remote Queensland. The first images and footage ever taken of a living night parrot. The bird world called it the find of the century. Now, I'll be straight with you, because this story has a wrinkle worth knowing. Some of Young's later claims about the bird were investigated by an independent panel and found not to hold up. But, and this matters, that original 2013 rediscovery was examined carefully and confirmed as genuine. The night parrot is real, and it is out there. A protected reserve now exists to guard it. So even where human beings muddy the water, the bird itself came through. The parrot didn't lie. It just waited a century for someone stubborn enough to find it. And if you're already enjoying this journey, I'll tell you now, the cases only get bigger from here. We're about to climb from insects and small birds up to leopards, lions, tigers, and something that stood taller than a man and should have died out with the Ice Age. Stick with me. Number 10. The Zanzibar leopard. Off the coast of East Africa lies the island of Zanzibar, and it once had a leopard all its own, a small, distinct island subspecies found nowhere else on Earth. The Zanzibar leopard's undoing wasn't just habitat loss, it was belief. Local folklore held that these leopards were kept by witches and sent out to do their bidding, and so the animal was hunted not merely as a threat to livestock, but as something evil. Through the second half of the 20th century, a determined campaign drove it toward oblivion, and by the 1990s, conservationists concluded the Zanzibar leopard was extinct. Wildlife officials stopped looking. Then, in 2018, a camera trap set during a wildlife survey on the island captured something moving through the brush at night. A leopard, with markings consistent with the island's own lost cat. The footage sent a jolt through the conservation world. I'll give you the honest measure of this one. That single sequence hasn't been nailed down with the full genetic certainty scientists would want before rewriting the record books. It is a strong, credible, tantalizing piece of evidence, not yet an ironclad case. But on an island where everyone had stopped searching, a predator supposedly gone for a generation looked straight into a lens. That alone tells you the door was never quite shut. Number 9. The New Guinea singing dog. Higher into the wild now, literally. The New Guinea singing dog is one of the strangest members of the entire dog family. It gets its name from its voice, a haunting, rising howl that one researcher described as a wolf's call carrying the overtones of whale song. For decades, the only singing dogs anyone could point to were the 200 or 300 living in zoos and private hands around the world, all descended from a few animals taken out of the wild long ago. Nobody had documented a wild one since roughly the 1970s. Scientists assumed the wild population was simply gone, leaving only the captive echoes. But in the remote highlands of the Indonesian half of New Guinea, up near a vast mine at around 14,000 feet, guides and workers kept reporting shy wild dogs. In 2016, an expedition led by researcher James McIntyre climbed into that punishing terrain and, on the last day, a pack finally walked past his trail cameras. Photographs at last. He went back in 2018 for blood samples, and in 2020, the genetic verdict came in. These wild Highland dogs were the real thing. A living, breeding, wild population of the singing dog, the very ancestors of the captive animals. The truth here is as solid as science gets. A wild lineage everyone had mourned was still up in the clouds, singing the whole time. We just never climbed high enough to hear it clearly. Before we go higher still, let me say one quick thing. If stories like these are your kind of thing, the lost turning up alive, the record books getting rewritten, then following along is the whole reason this channel exists. There are far more of these cases than most people would ever guess, and I've got a great many more of them to tell. Come along for the rest, because the next few are the ones that truly keep me up at night. Number 8. The Pinta Island tortoise. Some of you will know this next name, and it may sting a little. His name was Lonesome George, and for years he was the loneliest animal on the planet, the last known Pinta Island giant tortoise from another corner of the Galápagos. Scientists searched Pinta for a mate for decades and found none. George lived out his years at a research station, a living symbol of extinction happening in real time. And on the 24th of June, 2012, he died. When George died, his species died with him, or so the headline said. But here's the twist that keeps this one alive. Years earlier, on the slopes of Wolf Volcano on the neighboring island of Isabella, researchers had found tortoises carrying a curious genetic signature, the DNA of Pinta Island tortoises mixed into their own. At some point, whether by human hands moving animals around or by tortoises washing between islands, Pinta blood had spread to Isabella. Some of those hybrids were young, meaning a purebred Pinta parent may well have been alive on that volcano within recent memory, and might still be. So while George is gone, his kind may not be entirely erased. The lineage lives on, diluted, hiding in the herds of a larger island. Scientists now dream of breeding it back, generation by generation. It's a strange, bittersweet kind of survival, but it is survival, and it's more than we thought we had. Number 7. The Barbary lion. Now we come to a king. The Barbary lion was the great lion of North Africa, the lion of the Atlas Mountains, the one the Romans dragged into their arenas by the thousands. It was enormous, with a dark mane that ran down its back and belly, and it was the very image of a lion in the ancient world. Then came centuries of hunting and shrinking wilderness. By the middle of the 20th century, the Barbary lion was gone from the wild. The last confirmed wild individuals were shot in Morocco around the 1940s, with a few whispers of survivors clinging on into the years after. Extinct in the wild, that part is not in dispute. But the story doesn't end in the mountains. For generations, the sultans and kings of Morocco kept lions in a royal collection, lions handed to them as tribute from the Atlas region, the ancestral home of the Barbary. Descendants of those royal lions survive today, in Rabat and in a scatter of zoos. And here is the tantalizing part. Geneticists studying these captive animals believe some of them still carry Barbary blood. Not pure, perhaps, but a genuine thread of that lost mountain lion running quietly through living animals right now. The honest read, no one has confirmed a fully purebred Barbary lion still exists. But the possibility that the king of the Atlas lives on, in some measure, in a royal bloodline, that is a thread worth pulling, and people are pulling it. Number 6. The Caspian Tiger. If a lion can leave its blood behind, so can a tiger. The Caspian tiger was a giant, one of the largest cats that ever lived, prowling the reed beds and river forests from Turkey across Central Asia to the edge of China. It was hunted relentlessly, its habitat drained and farmed, and by around the 1970s, the last of them were gone. Another magnificent predator crossed off the list. Except for a discovery that changes everything about how we think of it. When scientists finally sequenced the Caspian tiger's DNA from old museum specimens and compared it to the world's surviving tigers, they found something astonishing. The Caspian tiger and the Amur tiger, the great Siberian tiger of the Russian Far East, still alive today, were all but genetically identical. In the key stretch of DNA they examined, the two differed by only a single letter. They were, for all practical purposes, the same tiger, split apart only recently by geography. Think about what that means. The Caspian tiger isn't a vanished branch we can never recover. Its nearest living relative is essentially itself, still breathing, still hunting in Siberia. And that is exactly why conservationists in Kazakhstan have launched a serious effort to bring tigers back to the old Caspian range, resettling Amur tigers into a vast river delta where their near twins once ruled. The Caspian tiger, in the truest genetic sense, may not be extinct at all. It may just be waiting to come home. Number 5. The woolly mammoth. I told you we'd go big. It doesn't get much bigger than this. We all carry the same picture in our heads. The woolly mammoth, shaggy and tusked, trudging across a frozen ice age plain, dying out with the saber-toothed cats in the glaciers tens of thousands of years ago. And across most of the world, that's true. The mammoths vanished from the mainland around the end of the last ice age. But not all of them. On Wrangel Island, a remote scrap of land in the Arctic Ocean off the coast of Siberia, a small population of woolly mammoths held on. And when I say held on, I mean far longer than almost anyone imagines. Those island mammoths survived until only about 4,000 years ago. Let that number settle for a moment. 4,000 years. The Great Pyramids of Egypt were already standing. Human civilization was well underway. Writing was invented, cities were rising, and out on that Arctic island, woolly mammoths were still walking around. They didn't die with the Ice Age. They outlived its ending by thousands of years, and they've left us more than bones. The Siberian permafrost has surrendered mammoth carcasses so well preserved that they still hold flesh, hair, and blood. Animals frozen so completely they look as though they lay down yesterday. From that tissue, scientists have recovered mammoth DNA, and that is why teams today are working in earnest to bring the mammoth back, to edit its genes into a living elephant relative and return something mammoth-like to the tundra. So here's the strange, honest truth about the woolly mammoth. It is extinct. And yet it may be the extinct animal with the best chance of standing on this earth again. Not a ghost, a project. Number 4. The eastern cougar. Now we come home, to the woods of the eastern United States, and to a case that should give every one of you pause. For a long time, the eastern cougar was considered its own kind of mountain lion, ranging across the forests of the east. As settlers cleared the land and shot the big cats out, the eastern cougar dwindled and disappeared. In 2018, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service made it official. They declared the eastern cougar extinct and removed it from the endangered species list. The eastern panther was, on paper, gone. But out here in the real world, the story refuses to stay tidy. Because cougars keep showing up in the east, and not always as blurry rumors. In 2011, a young male cougar was struck and killed by a car on a parkway in Connecticut. A real animal, a full-grown cougar, dead on a New England highway. When biologists tested its DNA, they traced it back to the Black Hills of South Dakota, some 1,500 miles away. That cat had walked, on its own 4 feet, clear across the country. It was one of the longest journeys ever recorded for a land mammal. Here's the nuance, and it's a beautiful one. The original eastern cougar may indeed be gone, but cougars from the west are quietly reclaiming the east, one long-distance wanderer at a time. So when a country person tells me they saw a big tan cat with a long, heavy tail slip across a back road at dusk, I no longer tell them they must be mistaken. Because sometimes now, they're right. And that idea, official extinction on one hand, real animals on the ground on the other, is exactly the ground our final 2 cases stand on. Number 3. The coelacanth. To understand why the top 2 matter, you have to understand this one, the single greatest "we were wrong" in the history of the study of life. The coelacanth is a big, heavy, deep blue fish with strange, thick, limb-like fins. a creature so ancient it belongs to a lineage stretching back hundreds of millions of years. And science knew it only from fossils. The youngest coelacanth fossils were about 66 million years old, meaning the animal had vanished from the rock record at the same moment the dinosaurs died. It was extinct. Not recently extinct. Extinct since the end of the age of dinosaurs. There was no debate. There was nothing to debate. Then, 2 days before Christmas in 1938, a young museum curator named Marjorie Courtenay Latimer went down to the docks in East London, South Africa, to sift through a fishing trawler's catch, as she often did. And there in the pile she found a 5-foot, steel blue fish with fins like nothing she'd ever seen. She didn't recognize it, but she recognized that it mattered. She fought to preserve it. And when the specialist finally laid eyes on it, he said it was as though a creature from 200 million years ago had walked back into the room alive. It was a coelacanth, a living one. 66 million years after science had buried the entire group. I cannot overstate what that did to biology. It proved, once and for all, that the fossil record is not a complete ledger of the dead, that the deep ocean and the deep wilderness can hide the impossible for spans of time we can barely comprehend. If a lineage can slip through 66 million years unnoticed, then no gap of 50 or 80 or 100 years should ever make us too certain. Which brings us, at last, to the two animals people are still arguing about today. Number 2, the ivory-billed woodpecker. They call it the Lord God bird, because that's what people used to blurt out when one flew overhead. The ivory-billed woodpecker was the largest woodpecker in the United States, a stunning black and white giant of the deep southern swamps, with a call like a child's toy trumpet. As the great old-growth bottomland forests were logged flat, the bird collapsed. The last universally accepted sighting was of a lone female in a Louisiana forest back in 1944. And ever since, the ivory bill has haunted American ornithology like nothing else. The most famous chapter came in 2004 and 2005, when a team, including researchers from Cornell, announced they had rediscovered the bird in the big woods of Arkansas, complete with a few seconds of contested video. The news went around the world. And then the doubts crept in. The footage was blurry. No one could produce the clean, undeniable photograph that would settle it. Expedition after expedition came up empty. It grew serious enough that in 2021, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service formally proposed declaring the ivory-billed woodpecker extinct. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. Because so many credible scientists and searchers pushed back, some presenting fresh drone footage and trail camera images they believed showed living birds, that the agency did something telling. In 2023, they delisted 21 other species as extinct, and they held the ivory bill back. Its case remains under review to this very day. Sit with that. The official verdict on whether this bird is extinct has not been rendered because the people who study it most closely cannot agree that it's gone. That is not a closed case. That is a bird that, in the eyes of the very government trying to rule on it, might still be flying through some flooded southern forest right now. Number 1. The thylacine. And so we arrive at the animal I promised you at the very start, the strongest case of them all. The thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, was a marvel, a marsupial predator the size of a large dog, sandy-colored, with dark tiger stripes running down its back and a stiff, kangaroo-like tail. It wasn't a cat or a dog or a wolf, though it looked like a strange blend of all three. It was something entirely its own, carrying its young in a pouch. Australian farmers blamed it for killing sheep, governments paid a bounty for its hide, and the killing was thorough. The last known thylacine died in a zoo in Hobart, Tasmania in 1936. That is the official end of the species. But the thylacine simply will not lie down. In the decades since that final captive animal died, more than 1,000 sightings have been reported, not by cranks alone, but by park rangers, wildlife officers, farmers, and experienced bushmen, people who know the Tasmanian wilderness intimately. And that southwestern corner of Tasmania is genuinely wild. Vast, roadless, tangled country where an animal that hunts by night and hides by day could plausibly go unseen for a very long time. For years, scientists dismissed all of it. And then, in 2023, a research team led out of the University of Tasmania did something no one had done properly before. They gathered more than 1,200 records spanning the whole 20th century, weighed each one for reliability, and mapped the animal's slow retreat. Their most likely conclusion put the true extinction somewhere in the middle decades of the last century, later than the official 1936. But when they ran the full range of the uncertainty, the model refused to close the door completely. It allowed that the thylacine may have survived as late as the closing years of the 20th century, and it left a small, stubborn, mathematical chance that a few could persist in that remote wilderness even now. I want to be honest with you, the way a person who spent his life out there has to be honest. That is a small chance. The likeliest truth is that the thylacine is gone, and has been for some time. I am not going to stand here and promise you it's alive, but a small chance is not zero. And of every animal we've talked about today, this is the one where the wild country is deep enough, the eyewitnesses are credible enough, and the science itself is uncertain enough that a careful person cannot say the word impossible. The thylacine is the closest thing we have to a living question mark, an animal declared dead almost 90 years ago that a team of scientists in our own decade could not quite bring themselves to bury. That's why it's number one. Closing. So there they are, 15 animals the world gave up on. Some came back with absolute certainty. A fish out of the age of dinosaurs, an insect on a lonely rock, a tortoise on a lava field. Some hover in that maddening gray zone where the honest answer isn't yes and isn't no, but we don't know yet. And that, to my mind, is the most exciting answer there is. If 40 years in the field taught me anything, it's a certain humility about that heavy word, extinct. We write it down with such confidence. And every so often, nature reaches out, taps us on the shoulder, and reminds us who's actually keeping the records. Now I'd love to hear from you on this one. Of all 15, which case do you believe in most? And just as important, is there an animal in your own part of the country that folks swear is still out there, no matter what the official books say? Tell me down in the comments. I read them, and those local stories are often where the real trails begin. And if you'd like to keep chasing these with me, come along. There are far more lost animals with a pulse than any list of 15 could hold, and I'll keep telling them as long as you'll keep watching. Here's one last thing to leave you with. Somewhere tonight, in a swamp or a mountain valley or a stretch of forest no one's walked in years, an animal we've already crossed off may be moving quietly through the dark, waiting, like all the others did, for someone patient enough to look. Maybe the next great rediscovery is already out there. Maybe it's closer than we think. And speaking of what's out there, there's another story sitting right on your screen now, one I think you'll take to if today's was your kind of thing. Go ahead and let it play.